and it seemed another devastating blow to Truman's prospects. The combination of the Southerners walking out and Henry Wallace leading his own Progressive Party campaign, plus all the gloom and doom that seemed to prevail throughout the Democratic Party, spelled only defeat, spelled a very bleak future.
But as Harry Truman arrived in Philadelphia, he was anything but bleak. In a small, windowless room beneath the convention floor, he sat with vice presidential nominee Alben Barkley and waited.
They kept him waiting till almost 2 o'clock in the morning. Everybody was exhausted. They felt demoralized. Many of them want Harry Truman to be their candidate. The Southerners had walked out of the convention. And so at 2 o'clock in the morning, out came Harry Truman in his white linen suit, and he stood up there and he said,
Senator Barkley and I'll win this election and make these Republicans like it. Don't you forget that.
He's a fighter. Truman is not about to slink out of town with his tail between his legs.
The Republican platform cries about cruelly high prices.
Truman had come into the presidency bewildered and frightened. Now the delegates sat stunned as a fire-breathing Truman tore into the Republicans.
The Republican platform comes out for slum clearance and low rental housing. I've been trying to get them to pass that housing bill ever since they met the first time.
Truman challenged the Republicans to live up to their promises.
I am therefore calling this Congress back into session on the 26th of July. If there's any reality behind that Republican platform, we ought to get some action out of the short session of the 80th Congress. They could do this job in 15 days if they want to do it. And they'll still have time to go out and run for office.
Truman had come out fighting, but still, no one thought he could win. All the polls made him a sure loser.
Everybody thought he was going to lose. I mean, that's not just a figure of speech. Even members of his own family, his mother-in-law, was quite sure that Harry Truman was going to lose.
Truman's Republican opponent was everything Truman was not. Educated, smooth, sophisticated, Tom Dewey was prepared, he said, to turn back 16 years of Democratic rule.
I pledge to you that on next January 20, there will begin in Washington the biggest unraveling, unsnarling, untangling operation in our nation's history.
From the beginning, Dewey was transfixed by polls and by Time magazine and everyone else was boosting him for president. He was very pleased with himself, very pleased with what he'd done, very sure that he was going to go on and be a great figure. They were so confident that some of the Dewey people had already bought houses in Washington.
On September 17th, Truman set out on what would become one of the most famous campaigns in American history.
He was saying goodbye to everybody and so forth, and Alben Barkley, a very good-hearted man, came up and said, "Give him hell, Harry." And Truman said something, "I'll give him hell, Alben." We had nothing to write about. The train's starting out on a Sunday afternoon, so everyone's writing about giving him hell.
From then on, "Give 'em hell, Harry" would become Harry Truman's battle cry. During the next 6 weeks, Truman would travel 22,000 miles, crisscrossing the country 3 times. The issues, he said, were simple. The Republicans wanted to turn back the clock, destroy Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. Truman was going to stop them.
If you give the Republicans complete control of this government, you might just as well turn it over to the special interests, and we'll start on a boom and bust cycle and try to go through just what we did in the 20s, and end up with a crash, which in the long run will do nobody any good but the communists.
Truman kept up a grueling pace, giving no quarter to his opponents. When the Progressive Party candidate Henry Wallace argued for cooperation with the Soviet Union, Truman attacked Wallace as a communist pawn. When the segregationist Dixiecrat Party nominated Strom Thurmond, Truman desegregated the armed forces, winning the votes of black Americans and changing the American military forever.
The armed forces, the seat of segregation, the seat of racism. And to have him issue that order, for whatever reason, was a great leap forward in history.
All we do is go out walking when the sun shines bright and gay. Oh, what do we do? What do we do on a do-do-do-y day?
Campaigning as if he had already won, Tom Dewey took no risks, offered no surprises.
His whole campaign was being run according to what the polls were telling them to do. Don't rock the boat. Don't say anything to antagonize anyone. Don't say anything controversial. Just be calm, smooth, speak in platitudes.
We believe in honesty, loyalty, fair play, concern for our neighbors, the innate ability of men to achieve. These convictions, arched over by our faith in God, are the inner meaning of the American way of life.
He didn't seem to have much empathy, if that's the word. He wouldn't cuddle up to Tom Dewey.
The Dewey campaign was very efficient. It was very carefully orchestrated. The official drink on board the Dewey train was the martini. The card game was bridge. On the Truman train, things were quite different. The drink of the hour was nearly always bourbon, and the card game was poker. Truman kept that train really moving. And he traveled and traveled and traveled, but he seemed to draw energy from it. He loved it. And as he progressed, he got better. And the more he traveled, the more the crowds turned out and the larger the crowds were.
Every town we pulled into had a high school band that played the Missouri Waltz before this president spoke. And everybody got so sick of that.
Always there was a Missouri Waltz. La, 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 la. And Truman, I'm told, hated the Missouri Waltz. And everywhere he got the Missouri Waltz.
Harry was a damn good campaigner. He loved to get out and mix with people, and he knew how to talk their language. You know, he was no highfalutin guy. He could be understood by every factory worker, every coal miner, every textile worker, every housewife.
I've been in politics a long time, and it makes no difference what they say about you if it isn't so. If they can prove it on you, you're in a bad fix indeed. I know.
He understood people. He especially understood people of his area, the Midwest, the farmers.
Vote for your farms. Vote for the standard of living that you've won under a Democratic administration. Get out there on election day and vote for your future.
You know, I covered every inch of the Truman whistle-stop campaign. I was every farmyard and Main Street and the rest of it. And I'd see these big crowds, and I think, well, Dewey has bigger crowds. Whatever I felt, I thought Dewey was going to win. I didn't know anyone who thought otherwise. Anybody.
As the campaign drew to a close, the New York Times was predicting Dewey would run away with the election. The Gallup poll was so certain of the outcome, it stopped polling before the end of October.
The night of the election, the head of the Secret Service went to New York to be with Mr. Dewey because he clearly was going to be the next president. And it just looked like a sure thing. And the only one who didn't think it was a sure thing was Harry Truman.
One evening, 3 or 4 days before the election, an anxious Bess Truman went quietly to see her husband's aide, Clark Clifford.
She said, "Clark, do you think Harry really believes that he can win?" And I said, "He gives every assurance of it, Mrs. Truman." She says, "Well,
he keeps saying he's going to win. Well, I said, that's the way he feels. I said, he's going to feel that way right up to the end. But she said, it's so hard to find anybody else who thinks that he can win. I think she felt that he did not have any chance of winning.
On election night, to escape reporters, Truman checked into a hotel in Excelsior Springs, just outside of Independence. He had a ham and cheese sandwich, a glass of buttermilk, and went to sleep. When he woke up, he learned he had pulled off the greatest upset in the history of American politics. Not one pollster or radio commentator or newspaper columnist had got it right. No one had dared predict a Truman victory.
I've sent the following wire to President Truman. My heartiest congratulations to you on your election and every good wish for a successful administration. I urge all Americans to unite behind you in support of every effort to keep our nation strong and free.
Truman came through as a feisty fighter, and we loved that, you know. The labor movement came around to admire Truman. We knew that on basic issues, he would stand with the people, including working people, against special interests, and that he was concerned and determined to help carry through the legacy of FDR.
We'll never know how many people voted for him because even though they thought he was going to lose, they liked him. Certainly a very great many people said later, I voted for Harry Truman even though I was sure he was going to lose because I liked him. It was the high point of his political life. He had made all the smarties look foolish.
I'm most happy to have together all the September Democrats and the October Democrats. And the Monday Democrats and the Tuesday Democrats and the Wednesday Democrats.
He got a tremendous welcome when he came back to Washington. Just tremendous. One of the biggest turnouts the town had seen. He just glowed with it. But boy, he came back to a tough second term. Just a tough second term.
At 64 years old, Truman had redeemed himself and his party. But in the next 4 years, he would need all his Missouri optimism to confront the challenges he would meet abroad and the frustrations he would suffer at home.